Our next speaker today is Amir Berenjian. Amir is the co-founder of the REM5 VR Lab and REM5 for Good. So REM5 was opened in 2017. It's an 8,000 square foot facility in Minneapolis, Minnesota, equipped with the latest VR technology. And Amir and his team host over 10,000 guests a year in their facility. REM5 for Good has facilitated VR-based training in diversity, equity, and inclusion for a number of companies, both national and multinational companies, including Cargill, General Mills, Target, and Boston Scientific. And Amir and his team have also offered VR-based training to local police departments, showcasing how implicit bias comes into play in high-stress scenarios and promoting safer and more empathetic interactions. So I will turn it over to Amir now. Thank you so much for being able to be here with us.
Awesome. Thank you, Vicky. Can you see my screen?
Yep.
Perfect. Cool. Well, thanks for having me here today. I'll start with just a little bit more background on REM5, and then it'll make hopefully a little bit more sense in terms of the role we play. But we're based out of Minneapolis, Minnesota. We have kind of a unique vertically integrated model that's really built around bringing VR to the public at scale. So like Vicky said, we have a physical site here in Minneapolis. We have about 8,000 square feet where we run about 120 different headsets ranging from HTC Vive Pros to Quest 1, Quest 2, and Oculus Goes. And we have an entire team that's set up to deploy the VR both here on site at REM5 and also off site when we're working with corporate clients and other organizations. And then we have our REM5 for Good initiative, which is really where we use VR for education and training purposes, and what we'll be talking about here today. And more specifically, the work we're doing for cultural competence and emotional intelligence education. And then the last piece of our business is our REM5 Studios, where we're actually producing content. So since 2017, we've worked with about 30,000 individuals. Most of those individuals have been first-time users of VR, so we've learned a lot, for better or for worse, in the field in terms of deploying XR technology. So stepping back, kind of as we approached education and training markets, and more specifically the diversity, equity, and inclusion space in the US, we kept coming back to the gap in accessibility and an understanding of the technology between the VR community, which has been doing a lot of amazing things, and also the DEI professionals that are out in the community doing the work. So we really focused on connecting the dots and listening to DEI professionals out in the community that are actually doing the work. And that's really helped shape and inform our approach with VR to date. So Eugene alluded to this a little bit earlier, but I wanted to, before jumping into some of the examples of the work that we're doing, I wanted to share some of the industry observations that we've had over the last couple of years. It's a $10 billion industry here in the US, massive, growing rapidly, but there's still many questions as to the effectiveness of this work. That said, there's been a lot of meaningful shifts just in the last few years alone. As millennials have made up more and more of the workforce. I think I saw a statistic recently that millennials are going to make up 75% of the workforce by 2025. They're really calling out corporations and pushing them past the headline initiatives and forcing accountability. So we've even seen with some of our clients here locally, they've gone as far as making executive compensation tied to diversity goals within the organization. So really system-wide accountability. Second or third, I guess, on the list there, we've seen DEI leaders moving out from within the HR silo, the human resources silo, and into the C-suite, which has given them more resources to do this work on an ongoing basis, which is what we're big believers in. We don't believe that this is a one workshop or one event a year and you're done. This is work that needs to be done every year, every month, every week, for decades to come to really drive this change. So we've seen that empowerment. And then lastly, McKinsey's actually done a lot of great work around showing that diversity isn't just the right thing to do, it actually helps businesses outperform their competitors financially. So diversity is driving innovation, and it's also a competitive advantage, and we're starting to see buy-in there. All of that said, there's still a lack of innovation in the DEI education space. And then COVID has really provided a variety, a whole host of new challenges in terms of working remotely and trying to do this work. So this really kind of sets the stage for VR pretty nicely. So where does VR fit today? So while we have aspirations of VR being the ultimate empathy machine and a dynamic tool to run simulations at scale, we at REM5 have taken a pretty simple approach in partnership with our advisory board of DEI educators. And so we've said, let's use VR to simply engage with a group of users. And once we have that audience captive and their interest peaked, because who's not interested in some fancy VR technology, then let's tell a story with VR. From there, let's work with our DEI facilitators and let's leverage that shared experience to open the door for meaningful discussion around bias and systemic discrimination. So next, I'll kind of go through a few examples of how we've done that. So this first case study is around a VR experience that we've created called Steps of Privilege. It's an interactive experience built on the Quest that simulates the exercise commonly known as the privilege walk, where users take steps forward and backwards based on a facilitator reading questions that have to do with the nuances of privilege. And in real life, or doing this exercise in real life, can exploit the trauma of individuals for the sake of the exercise. So one of the things we really love about doing this exercise in VR is it allows us to introduce these stories through avatars, and it really gives the user a safe space to reflect on their own privilege throughout the experience. So in practice to date, we typically put about 10 to 20 users through this experience at the same time. And then after the experience, we ask the participants to write down some things that surprised them about themselves and or the other participants' stories that were pre-programmed into the VR experience. Then from there, there's a group discussion led by a facilitator where we really build on some of those revelations that happened during the experience. And then ultimately, we try to move towards action items based on those learnings. The second case study here, we did some work with a company called Cargill. They're one of the largest privately held companies here in the United States. We used a 360 video experience called Traveling While Black by Roger Ross Williams and Felix and Paul. It's a cinematic VR experience that immerses the viewer in the long history of restriction of movement for Black Americans and the creation of safe spaces in our communities. We put in one day about 800 Cargill employees through this experience in groups of 40 to 50. And really some of the key takeaways there are that it was a very eye-opening and educational experience for the users. So for us back to just its simplest level, using VR in this use case was a very powerful way and engaging way to deliver this meaningful content. And then I'd say most importantly with the Cargill example, we created buzz throughout the organization that became the shared experience for coworkers that perhaps didn't have a launching point for conversations about systemic racism. And the company really used that experience and also the reflections from post-experience as building blocks to drive the discussion forward that lasted for weeks and even months after the day that we were there using VR. And then lastly, with COVID, our ability to be in person was slowed and obviously do in-headset VR at scale like we had in the past. So we really leveraged WebXR technology, which is a 3D space with spatial audio accessible on desktop through a browser, very kind of comparable to the Virbella platform that's being used for the conference here. And so one of the first things we did early on in the pandemic is we built a virtual exhibition space that consisted of images, video, data visualization, 360 photos, audio, to really break down the Minnesota Nice mantra and tell the story of the deep inequities we have here in Minnesota and across the United States. And so being that it's an interactive exercise, it's really an alternative to slides and a video chat, which is exactly what we're doing right now, as a content delivery tool for remote training. And since we launched it, we've had a couple thousand users through it, and the engagement has been really, really positive. And then lastly, and this is the area where we've just started to utilize this tool in the last couple months, is in kind of partnership with this One City, Two Realities experience, we've hosted facilitated discussions right within the WebXR space, and we've found that participants can actually be more open to discussing DEI topics when not on camera or in person. So through this WebXR environment, which is a very fascinating data point for us. So based on the positive feedback over the last 12 months with this WebXR platform, we hope to continue to deploy WebXR in the future, even when we're back to doing in-person events. So lastly, kind of some final thoughts here. So corporations are shifting to a systematic approach, and there's increased accountability, but they're still looking for innovation and new tools, which provides a great opportunity for us in the VR space. But we need to meet the users where they are with XR technology, and that is not really having a great understanding of the technology itself and the potential use cases for it outside of gaming, frankly. So where we've found success early on is really building on this shared experience that VR can provide to open paths for meaningful and facilitated discussion. In the future, we hope to expand and work towards fail-safe environments and more dynamic experiences. But for the time being, we're very excited to continue to collaborate with DEI professionals to find incremental value for VR and do our part to move the needle. That's it from me.